Greetings, my friends. Welcome to Rendezvous, not Rendezvous, Rendezvous with Jamie McGlue. So we're going to talk about opening our minds. So this is an invitation to open your mind. Maybe your mind's already more open and loose and luxuriantly expansive than my own. So please teach me the trick if that's the case. But yeah, in a nutshell, I'm gonna try not to go into too much detail. But I'm gonna just mention a bunch of things where I think it's either something that I believe, I'm certain this is a thing, or I think it's probably true, or I think it's possibly true, maybe. Um, and So I'm going to mention these, and it's just kind of food for thought. So you could go look into these yourself. But we don't know what we don't know. So I'm going to give you some breadcrumb trails you could follow if you want. If you want more like resources or things to look up, send me a message on on Instagram or like on YouTube here or wherever. Give me a call. Telepathically, enter my mind, and I will tell you. But in general, what I would do to this thing is, with any topic, I look up. So I usually go through the internet, but you could do this through a library if you wanted. But I go through the internet and I search one side of the argument, and then I search the other. Like, so I'll enter, vaccines cause autism. And also in a separate window, vaccines don't cause autism. And I'll just go both sides and just try to see what both things say. Or say it's someone says you should, say like I've got a baby, and if there's some certain health advice which I don't really trust, and I think I've got good reasons. I think it's a rational, principled, evidence-based approach that I take to my child. But there's certain things where I'm like, the authorities are wrong about enough stuff where I can't just outsource that, unfortunately. Or fortunately, who knows? But where anyway, I'll do it myself. And so I'll go, say it's like, there's this thing like, nappy cream or whatever, for nappy rash. I will go look, I'll, search, why never to use nappy rash, or nappy rash harmful effects, But then I'll also, what's wrong with nappy rash, whatever, just to see what comes up, and then just go through, look, and open in new windows. Don't go into them all at once, but just kind of scan through the list there, the results, and go, control, click, or whatever, like open in a new tab, like whatever looks like, interesting or useful stuff. And then, when I go to it, if it's not really useful, okay, I close it, get rid of it. But if it's useful, okay, I'll keep it there for later. And then I'll also go to the other side, like what's in favor of, like benefits of nappy cream, debunked, nappy cream concerns debunked, whatever, and look at it from both sides. And you've got your intuitive feeling of like who makes sense. Then you've also got who's writing it and what is their motivation. Oh, this is by a mother. Okay, so her motivation is to protect her children, but also maybe she's got like a certain ideology or a certain worldview, which she's confirming, by saying, this is bad. Maybe she likes more natural stuff. Whereas the other thing about, what's their, point of view? Well, these people, they make nappy rash cream. Oh, okay, well, they've got an interest in, think about where the information comes from. Which I got from history, like that's when you study history, you have to look at who's the source for any information, because often that affects what they tell you. But then you look at the internal consistency within it, like do they contradict themselves, like, and within the article for one thing, but you might notice they say somewhere there's no evidence that blah blah blah, and then at the end of the article they say, a study in 2015 showed there may be a problem with blah blah blah. Oh, you said there was no evidence, and then now you're saying there might be. Not consistent. That's like, a bit of a red flag. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it means, okay, that's some evidence against it. It tilts the scales that way, Um, and then, and also if the same writer or same organization, look at other articles, over time you start to notice who, they say one thing here, but then they say a different thing there. Like, the government during COVID, they're constantly contradicting themselves. Like, oh, you have to stay inside. It's dangerous to be outside. But then it's like, oh, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, everyone get out on the street. It's fine. But you said it's bad. What? It doesn't make sense. But then also, so internal consistency or lack thereof, and then also consistency between sources. So say if other people, other sources, seemingly not connected, have the same point of view, then okay, that seems to be more reason for it. However, there's also powerful interests who will put money into 100 different organizations. And so they might, just because 99 people in the room have one opinion, does not mean it's true, does not mean it's right. 99 people in the room used to say the earth was flat. One person said it wasn't. Who was right, So that, how do we know whether we're in that situation or whether we're in the situation where nowadays one person says it's flat, 99 say it's round? How do you know? Well, you have to look at all these factors and make up your mind. And at the end of the day, I think for many things we just don't know. You just have to make a judgment call. But you can get close enough by putting in the work, not being lazy, and you can cultivate trusted sources, but ideally to be doing the work yourself, and kind of balance up the scales of, okay, well, this all these factors I'm mentioning, and then also between opposing views, right? So not just, oh, other people have the same opinion. Okay, it means more, bit more reason. So maybe, when things are true, many people notice them. So, oh, maybe this is one of the true things. But also, when there's a lie and someone's benefiting from it, often more than one people make the lie. More than one person benefits from it. Many people could be controlled or funded by one source, a single source, but like Goldman Sachs funding the Republicans and the Democrats, it's like, or the Bank of Ireland funding, being in cahoots with, the British, but then funding the revolutionaries in the War of Independence, who then, Ireland became independent, and the Bank of Ireland, it was on good terms with them because they'd funded them, so hedging their bets. Anyway, but you see between, like, or someone says nappy rash cream's bad, the other says it's good, the other side of the debate or whatever, or maybe someone's in the middle, a different point of view says, oh, it's bad in this situation, good in that situation. Just compare their arguments and who makes sense, and, who's referring more to evidence, who's referring more to emotion, so all these factors, right? There's a little summary of some critical thinking skills, which I apply and which you should apply too, I think. But yeah, so now that's done. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to play you a sweet little song, and then get into just quickly running through a bunch of things which might, surprise you. And I'm sort of coming out. Some of these probably almost like coming out of the closet, like some of these things people would think like, oh my God, oh, it's like talking about them is like, it can make people reassess their opinion of you. Like, oh, I thought you were, pretty balanced. I thought that guy was pretty balanced, but he thinks that thing's possible. Maybe I need to reassess everything about, maybe he's off with the fairies. And so that's why I think a lot of people, don't want to talk, they self-censor. But, I think I really think there's greater risk in being closed-minded than in being open-minded. And if you're not, I think the real thing is if you're not open-minded enough. Like, people think, oh, you're really open-minded, you're going to get tricked and brainwashed. It's like, well, so long as you're open-minded to the possibility that people are lying to you or people are wrong, then no one can trap you. The only problem is if you get closed-minded, you go, I'm open-minded to things, and you go, oh, dinosaurs run the world. The Nessie is the queen of Earth ruling from Antarctica or something, and okay, the Loch Ness Monster rules the Earth. I'm open to that. I'll consider that. I'll watch a documentary. Then 2 hours later, this is definitely true. They wouldn't lie to me. Nessie wouldn't lie to me. It's like, it's an extreme example, but you know, if someone's like, oh no, I don't think that's true because blah blah blah. If you're open-minded to that, and also just, you know, thinking for yourself, like, oh, okay, am I jumping to conclusions? Is this, you know, then you remain fully open-minded. You don't stop halfway. Then there's no danger, because that open-mindedness includes questioning any things which might not be true, which you might encounter in the course of your open-minded journeys. On the other hand, conversely, if someone, if history is just full of, just littered with examples of tragedies caused by a lack of open-mindedness, people being too close-minded. Hitler, like, oh yeah, the Jews are bad for sure. Are you sure, Hitler? Have you thought this through? Aren't we all just branches on the same tree? No, I know what I'm talking about. This is, all right, couldn't get through to him, you know, like no one was going to change his mind. Or, you know, doctors who were giving lobotomies, you know, drilling into your head, stirring the brains, or giving leeches to people, or, you know, electroshock therapy, which wiped out their memories and stuff. Which, you know, two of those three things were fairly recent things. It's like, you know, they're like, oh, this is definitely right, you know, and so, yeah, or communists, you know, thinking, you know, it's like, you know, millions and millions of people have been killed by this ideology through time. Like, it's not practical. There's too many holes in the narrative. It's a nice narrative, but there's too many holes, which it's not mapping out the terrain of reality accurately enough. It creates these traps, deadly traps. It's like, you know, but still there's people who, you know, who don't want to see that, you know. So anyway, all right. So open-mindedness. So a little song. Once upon a time, I was walking with God, and then 5 minutes later I wasn't. I was shocked. I was all alone. I had to think for myself, and maybe one day I'll be swimming in wisdom. But until then, I'll just have to be thinking, open-minded but skeptical. I call that song Fill in the Blank. Okay, so yeah, all right, let's see. So some things, now, I know I'm lying to you a little bit, but very briefly, I will just preface this by saying some things you might think are outlandish, like there's no way that's possible. But I would just say a few brief things there is that we don't, you know, there are conceivable pathways that history could have evolved down. There's directions that history can go, or the universe can go. Does this happen or does that happen? You know, 1 or 0, left or right, you know? Yes or no to this condition, you know? And there's billions of conditions and they all multiply and add up, you know? So, like, oh, you know, JFK was killed by the CIA, or JFK was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, or he's killed by the central bank, like the Federal Reserve, or the Federal Reserve and the CIA, or the Federal Reserve, the CIA and the mafia, or just the mafia, or someone else, or aliens. You know, who knows? There's all these different paths. Or he wasn't killed, you know, I don't know, he went to Mexico. Some of these are more likely than others, but like you can, there are potential paths that you could think, or maybe Lee Harvey Oswald and his friend who no one ever heard about, or something, you know? There's many paths we can imagine things go down. And so the thing is, how do we know which path we are on, right? So say like we can think, we know that through every year or every few years, you look back and you're like, oh my God, wow, I've really improved my perspective. I've kind of learned things, you know? I don't see things the same way as I did before. Like my beliefs have changed a bit. And that's a good thing. It means we're learning. But that also means, we're not at the end of the process, right? So for sure, right now, there are things which we're oblivious to. And for sure, there are powerful people on the planet who have secrets, right? History just keeps revealing. Recently, many, many, many secrets are coming out, But for sure, just God only knows. Just can you imagine how many crazy secrets there must be? Now, even if you think there's not a huge number, for sure we don't know everything, right? So there's some things right now where our perspective, what we believe, is actually wrong. It's limited. It's missing important information that would shock us, Um, so that's the fact. But then whenever people tell us about things which we don't yet believe in, we're so skeptical and like, oh, no way. We're like, oh, yeah, there's things we don't know. Yeah, sure. It makes sense. But then, oh, what about this? Oh, I don't believe that. Well, you don't right now, but I mean, I'm telling you this. Why don't you? I want you to think about it. But like, oh, but that's too different to what I believe. Unless it's right next door to what I believe, then I'm not going to consider it. It's like, well, how do you know, over 10 years, the things you start believing in, they're not like next door to what you believed 10 years ago. They can be quite different. And so how do you know that your idea of what the world is actually accurate? And how do you know that the universe didn't actually evolve down some other pathway which seems ridiculous to you, but it's just the way it is. It's just real. And your ideas are actually ridiculous. And maybe they got into your head by accident or by someone else's design through controlling education or the media or whatever. We could imagine ways that it's possible. And we don't need to say that it definitely is the case. But I think to be fair and to be rational, we need to admit that, well, we don't actually have any evidence about which parallel universe we're in. Are we in the universe where we know everything, or where, let's say more usefully, are we in the parallel universe, so to speak, the pathway of history, where of all the potential histories that could be? Are we on the pathway where all the secrets that we're not aware of, then they won't change the worldview that much? They're not that shocking. Are we on? But we don't know them. But it would be surprising, but it's not too crazy. Is that the world we're in, or are we actually on one of the pathways where it's really crazy, totally different to what we think? Very different. Some things, of course, will be the same, but 20% of the big things we believe are just totally the truth is totally different. How do we know? I would say we don't know. And we need to be comfortable with that. It's nothing to be worried about. Actually, it's kind of interesting and exciting. It's like, there's a journey of discovery, curiosity, an adventure to find out what's going on. And it's just basic humility, I think, and self-confidence and emotional self-sufficiency, where you don't have this crutch of, oh, my ideas about the world, if I don't have them, I'm going to fall over. It's like, you're fine. Eckhart Tolle talks about, the state of not knowing, and that it's actually a state full of knowing on a deeper sense. It's like wisdom, enlightenment in a way is this state of being comfortable with not having an answer for things. And that actually that state is where you're open-minded, and you can learn things. And so wise people tend to, like Socrates says, or is said to have said, all I know is that I know nothing. So humility begets wisdom. But yeah, so I would say, yeah. And then if you think about it, some of the things I'm going to say, I would say are possible. I don't know if they're true, but I would say that there's the big lie theory, like Joseph Goebbels talked about, the Nazi guy, propagandist. Like if you tell a big enough lie, people will believe it because they think, oh, there's no way they're lying about that. That's too crazy. That's too much of a leap, And so people can use that, they can do something really bad, but, and lie about what, or make a really big lie. And people would go, okay, well, that would, that would be like really dangerous. So that they wouldn't do that. But it's like, no, you wouldn't do that. But they're seeing an opportunity and they're like, yeah, sure. People would, and so essentially they're bluffing, someone's like, oh, they wouldn't put in 100 extra chips, if they didn't have something good. So no, they've got nothing. They're just really emotionally dominant and they're just pushing you around or whatever, or they're just crazy, reckless, Um, and then there's also the thing, I guess there's a final point, that potentially corrupt interests, whether in your country or internationally or whatever, apart from just this ignorance for sure, just accidental things, us being wrong just because we're wrong. We thought the world was flat, so, that was just an idea everyone had. It makes sense based on what we see, the illusion of flatness that we see. Even if, the Vatican and stuff were trying to hold it in place later on, originally it didn't come from power, it's just ignorance. But also, for sure, history is full of examples, and recent history is full of examples, the present moment for sure, and the future, surely, human nature, following the pattern recognition is that powerful people love to expand their power through lying to others, and they present you a fictional virtual world for you to live in while they go around clean everyone's pockets, or someone said for the enemy, you create a world for your enemy thinks they're in this world, they're in this battlefield, but actually that's just a story you've given them, mind games. Anyway, so one thing to be aware of is that if powerful people have crossed the line too far, right, and if they, it's like the equivalent of like when the law used to be, oh, you get killed if you steal a loaf of bread. So people would steal a loaf of bread because they're hungry, but then they'd also, okay, I'll kill the person, or someone's going to tell the cops, I'll kill them. Doesn't matter. I'm going to die either way, so there's no loss. Or I'll also rob their gold, instead of just the bread. Instead of, if the law, then later on they realized, oh, okay, reformed the law, and they said, oh, if you steal bread, there's a lower punishment, a lighter punishment than if you, rob or kill people. And then there's people who would steal bread, but they wouldn't go the further step, even though, oh, stealing the gold would be useful. But no, the crime would be more serious if I do that. I'll just stick with the bread. I don't want to risk that extra penalty. If there are people who are in, say, a country or in the world globally, who have, and I think there probably are, as you could guess from what I'm saying, who have crossed the line into criminality so badly that, if the public ever discovers it, they know if the public ever finds out about this en masse, if the majority come to understand what we have done, we're going to get executed or we're going to get put in prison. Like, it's all over for us. If they're already at that point, they've crossed that line, there's no longer any incentive for them not to just expand their profit and their power. Because what are they going to do? Kill me twice? No, go from a 100-year sentence to a 200-year sentence? So, oh, okay, well, so that opens the door to, we go, no, there's no way all these horrendous things could be being done. But there's a certain line where if people cross that line, then it comes a point where actually it's in their interest from a limited egoic, point of view. If you're separated, you're suffering the illusion of separation. You're not aware that we're all one big organism, superorganism, one tree of life with many branches. I'm a branch, you're a branch, but we're one tree. So they're disconnected from love there. From that point of view, it's in their interest to just, the risk of committing all these, instead of one atrocity, which will get me executed, why don't I do 10 and just engage in them? And, there's there's a slightly greater chance people find out because I'm doing more things. I'm affecting the environment more. But my profits are huge, really, if people are going to find the other thing, they're going to find this, it's not much of a change, so the calculus is in their interest to just keep pushing, make it worth their while. And then also there's that big lie thing that comes in of a lot of people. If they say, oh yeah, guess what, the government or, these corporations or whatever, these people, they're not, I know you think they're just doing one, the thing wrong, they're just a bit corrupt. But actually, they're trying to kill us all. They're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this. And, there's a thing where if you do enough bad things, it's kind of actually, it lowers the chance that people are going to catch you. Because the normal people who aren't paying attention to this, when the people who are open-minded enough and conscious enough and kind of hardworking and conscientious enough and courageous enough to share what they find in their curiosity and their explorations intellectually, when those people talk to the rest of the people, if the truth is just really significantly different, if there's a big gulf or delta between what people think is going on and what's actually going on in the world, if you can traverse that distance before people start noticing, you can have it at a point where you've got a critical mass of difference, where it's like, it's so different that very few people will believe it. And so at that point, people start self-censoring. They're like, oh, do I want to tell people? Everyone's going to think I'm crazy. And so you have some people, and then you divide the divide and conquer of the more aware minority who can see what's going on. Where you have some of them who are like, absolutist, like, no, just tell the truth, exactly what I think, And then you'll have others on the other end, like, no, like, or maybe next to them might be like, oh, like, I agree with you. I definitely think I have the same opinions as you, but I think we shouldn't talk about some of the stuff because we need to be practical and we need to connect with people and expand, get them to start thinking. So bring them in at this level, and then once they've digested that, we can give them the next stuff to digest. But they're not ready for the full truth yet. They'll just think we're crazy. And then you've got another level next to them who'd be like, no, you two are crazy. Like, that's totally wrong. I don't agree with you, what you think about that. I agree with these basic things, but you go too far when you start talking about that. But then actually subconsciously they do agree, but they're repressing that because they wish they didn't believe these things because they know it's going to make them look crazy. And so you have that. And then another level below them or next to them would be people who genuinely don't believe in these more extreme things. And so they're like, well, I agree with you on these things, but man, the other stuff, I just don't think that makes sense. And they're genuine about that. They're not repressing their awareness that, something's going on. They're just not aware. And so you've got that whole, these different versions of the people who are aware that some weird things are going on, that, big lies in society. And so if I were like trying to take over the world or trying to take over a country, that would make sense to actually do a bunch of really crazy things where you're going to make the people who are aware of it. If you just do one crazy thing, the people can tell everyone else about it and then you get in trouble. But if you do like a bunch of things where it gets to the point where people won't believe them, they'll think, no, that's crazy. That's so far-fetched. Then you actually turn the people against the minority who's trying to help them. So are we in the universe or the parallel universe where that's happening, or to a large extent, or where that's happening to some sort of extent, or whether it's happening to no extent at all? I don't know. All right. So now, man, I'm accidentally like baiting you like a salesman. So, okay, finally, what specific things do I think which might be interesting for you? So I think 9/11, it was either for sure the Saudi members of the Saudi government and I think royal family were involved in planning. That's for sure. And when planes were grounded after, and Saudis have a lot of influence in America and vice versa, but the Americans provided, since the end of World War II, military protection for Saudi Arabia, which was a new country. The Saudi tribes, took over a large part of the Ottoman Empire, which had collapsed at the end of World War I. So the Americans provided military protection in exchange for the oil. The Saudis could only trade in US dollars. That was like the deal. As far as I understand it, that was it. So it gave rise to the petrodollar, where the American dollar is really strong. Everyone has to use it. And then you also have it as a reserve currency, Bretton Woods. But whatever, there's a powerful relationship there. And just after 9/11 happened, all the planes were grounded, but a few planes were allowed to take off just after the attacks. And they were carrying high-level Saudis, and including members of bin Laden's family left the US. And there's evidence bin Laden was connected to the CIA, or that they trained him for the Mujahideen, I think, in Afghanistan when they were fighting the Soviets. I think that's the case. There's things of like, like some spy in Pakistan. I think he had sent a huge amount of money to the Bin Laden family or something. There's weird things going on where at a very minimum, the Saudis were involved, U.S. allies were involved, and they were never, even recently, the U.S. has been supplying them with weapons for a war, a genocidal war in Yemen, which, all these people putting up Ukrainian flags on there. I wouldn't imagine being a Yemeni and seeing everyone talking about Ukraine. And, fair enough, like, it's awful what's happening there. But it's just like, what about Yemen? It's like, just as bad, and no one gave a fuck, like, and still, like, it's an awful situation. Millions of children dead, and disease, and just crazy, terrible things. And the US was, supporting that because of Saudi Arabia. So anyway, so they, that nothing happened there, but for sure they were involved to some extent, right? Or there's some sort of connection there. We don't know, how. I'd say, involved. Sorry, to be clear, I don't know if they were involved in planning it, but that there was a connection there, and that was never made public, but then you get to, there's all these other, crazy things, but like crazy in the sense of like, well, very surprising. But my feeling would be that, to make cut to the chase, that either rogue elements of the U.S. Government, and military, like, kind of the bureaucracy who's not elected, who are always there, the deep state, right? Rogue elements, so they're breaking the Constitution, they're, and acting in the shadows. Either they either planned 9/11 as an attack on themselves in order to launch, because then that gave them the excuse to go after the peace of the Cold War had ended. America spread around the world and, launched a surveillance state of its own citizens, brought in the Patriot Act and violated, much of which is a huge thing. And a lot of it was already prepared before 9/11 even happened. So they were looking for an excuse to bring these things in. So either they planned it themselves in order to, kind of expand this empire overseas, or they allowed it to happen, or they saw people were planning it and they helped them through, covert CIA assets or whatever, trying to make sure that, these terrorists didn't know they were actually helping them. I don't know which it is, but there's a lot of very fishy things. Building 7, for example, never talked about in the official government report, but trades, there wasn't twin towers. It's the triplet towers, There was a third one, which wasn't right next to them, but it was in the area. And it wasn't hit by a plane, but it collapsed. And it looks like a controlled demolition, just collapses straight down. And there was a naval intelligence office there. There were a lot of records, from military records, like accounting stuff there. They just that's a coincidence. Then also the plane that hit the Pentagon, they never found like a significant amount of rubble, as I understand it. And it's like, oh, that's weird. And there's no footage of it, even though it like pulled off some crazy like 360 or something around the Pentagon before it, and it didn't get shot down, somehow hitting, the most secure building in the world probably. And it, so this plane, apparently, not a bomb, apparently, even though no significant wreckage was recovered from it, struck the accounting office for, I think, some military department there. And just after, one day prior, the Donald Rumsfeld, I think, the Secretary of Defense, went before the public and said, so here's the thing. We can't account for 17 billion, or was it 1.7 trillion, 17 trillion, something bananas. And like whatever, some huge sum of money. So we can't account for it. We don't know where it is, of your taxpayer money. Meanwhile, if you distributed that between the citizens, like, okay, actually, I guess we don't really need to tax you this much. You keep that money. Instead of us taking your money as tax and then giving it back to you to help you, quote unquote, you keep it, do something. If you distributed that between the American population, it would be a huge amount of money per person. So, and it just disappeared. And then the next day, swept under the rug because, we're under attack. And guess what? One of the planes hits the accounting department, which had all the files. So now, I guess that's behind us, right? So and I could go on, but I'm not going to, right? There's that documentary Zeitgeist was pretty good. If you can even watch it these days, it seems things are getting clamped down a bit. some things in that I'm not sure I agree with, but there's a lot of talks about the Federal Reserve money system and also 9/11, and a lot of that seems fairly useful stuff as a starting point. And I'm sure people go too far with some of these things, but and again, I don't know what the truth is, but I'm here to say, hey, let's be open-minded and say, do we know what's going on? I don't know, but I'm thinking like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of tired of self-censoring in general, and I think I'm tired of other people self-censoring too. So let's just be honest here. So what? Okay, so 9/11. One thing I'm like, yeah, something fishy going there. The Federal Reserve and the central banks of the world seem to be, I believe, again, it's very hard to know, but it seems to be based on things, many documentaries I've watched and things I've read. Say that there's a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward G. Griffin, and I haven't read it yet, but he does a deep dive into it, into the Federal Reserve in America in particular. But from what I understand, it's like a banking cartel. It seems like it's a global criminal cartel, which is controlling the money supply of all the countries. And I'm not sure how centralized it is. Like, are there different cartels going on? But it does seem that, the Federal Reserve one may have been set up by kind of banking interests connected to the Bank of England, like the Warburgs or something. And then you have the Rockefellers and Morgans potentially involved. I haven't looked into it enough. But you look into it, there's a bunch of things where it's like, oh, they passed in 1913. It's, by the way, Congress, it's unconstitutional, as I understand it, to have any money except for gold and silver. That's US dollars are a weight of gold or silver. That's what it is. You can have a paper certificate, which can be redeemable for paper, silver or gold. I think there was some Supreme Court case which decided that. But now, at some point they just took it off the gold standard and said, no, you can't, like get the gold. And we can just print it out of thin air, and it's like a hidden tax on you. And it certainly seems like the central bank, ECB in Europe, Federal Reserve in America, the Reserve Bank in Australia, all these things seem a bit slimy, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so though. It seems like, yeah, it's like a global banking cartel kind of, or at least a series of cartels. Yeah, basically, like say in the Federal Reserve, they can print money out of thin air. And banks can do this also. The banks which are affiliated and connected to the Federal Reserve, they can just loan money to the government, say, and I think also big banks can do it when they loan it to individuals. But for sure, the Federal Reserve can loan money to the government, and they don't have the money there. They just print it out of thin air, and the government exchanges certificates of debt to them. So the central bank has just gained all this. Oh, look, we have all this debt owed to us. So they just made all this money out of. It's not like, oh, here's the money, we're printing it and we give it to the government, no strings attached. No, it's like, oh, now every dollar of that is a debt you owe to us, and the American citizens owe to us, and there's compounding interest on it. Now you might ask, where does the interest for that come from? Well, is the economy going to grow faster than compounding interest? And anyway, even if it could, why is there interest on this if this is just for the American people? And then you realize, oh, it's a private bank pretending to be a government bank. That seems to be the situation. And JFK was starting to print his own money. He had issued an executive order. I can't remember the number. Look it up though. And printing his own currency very shortly before he was assassinated. This is the third central bank the US has, I believe. I'm pretty sure the second one, the president, so John Adams, let the charter for it expire because it wasn't a permanent thing. They had like this, charter thing, like it had a certain expiry date, but he didn't renew it. And when he refused to renew it, there were several assassination attempts on his life. He survived them. And he said something like, you're a nest of vipers and I shall root you out, or something like that. But yeah, pretty crazy, And Abraham Lincoln also said, I have two enemies. I have two great enemies, the Confederates in the South and the money lenders or the financial interests in the North. Of the two, the latter is the greater enemy, the greater danger. And then he got killed as well, which is interesting. So, I mean, I don't know. Don't want to cast aspersions. I hope this is just, it looks like this, but actually they're good people, they're doing good things, and it's a misunderstanding. I don't know. But from looking into it, it doesn't seem like that's what's going on. But I don't know. Again, I do not know. I'm comfortable talking about possibilities while just being honest, like, yeah, I don't know, you know. And I know enough in the world to navigate and take care of myself and those around me. And by sharing my perspectives here, I'm trying to take care of all of us, including the central bankers. Because if we don't balance out our civilization, we're all going to die. We're all going to get wiped out. So by just imploding in, you know, division and, you know, just insane policies. So I think this is in everyone's interest. Just even if I'm wrong about half the stuff I say, which I don't think I am, but I don't know, then I think it's healthy to talk about this. And if everyone was just really candid, I think we would figure stuff out a lot more. Information would flow, and we would see. Very important to be open-minded to other people when they contradict you and see, are they right? Because there is such a thing as confirmation bias, and wanting to, it's very evolutionarily built in, I guess, from us adapting to physically to ecosystems and stuff. And then that similar technology has been mapped onto the intellectual exploration. So, you know, you got a system that works for gathering food. Okay, keep it. It's not broken, don't fix it. It's precious to find something that works in any sense. And then with ideas, we're like, oh, here's an explanation of how things work and it's working for me. You have to have a bunch of like collapses of its functionality before people usually are willing to consider an alternative point of view. But yeah, it's good to be open-minded to that. And I am, you know. So, but anyway, okay, so 9/11, central banks. Global warming, it seemed, you know, the temperature has been much higher in the past than it is now. And I think, you know, I don't know, but it seems like some people say there is no significant global warming going on. There's a thing called the World Climate Declaration, WCD, which was signed by the Nobel last year's, among other people, like 1,600 people have signed it. Some of them climate scientists, others like geologists and, you know, other scientists, and other people just, you know, people, I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but it seems like there's some people there who, you know, they're not like just scientists, I think. But you know, and I also saw articles being like, oh, this thing's a total farce. But then other ones, you look into it a bit more and it's like, you know, this guy, last year's winner of the Nobel Prize for Physics, is saying, yeah, the climate emergency thing is pseudoscience. I'm the scientist here. This is like the media and the UN bureaucrats. They're not scientists. And they're claiming that, oh, it's pseudoscience, you know, to deny, climate denier, how dare you? And it's like, and they're saying like, no, that they're the pseudoscientists. Like they're the deniers. They're the irrational ones. And are they doing it because they want to centralize power and, you know, make a bunch of money? Like Al Gore made, you know, millions of dollars. John Kerry made, you know, these people, I don't know exactly how, but I believe they have made money off of this, allegedly. Definitely there's a lot of power being conglomerated under the name of fixing the climate crisis, which I don't really trust those intentions. But so I don't know. So he said there's no significant increase, this guy, there's no significant increase in the frequency of natural disasters. There's no significant temperature change, I believe he said. That basically this is being used as kind of like shock journalism, you know, journalism, which is a dying industry, by the way, because largely because of the internet. There's a lot of free content online, and so a lot of the legacy media, they're kind of shrinking and dying, and so they're very desperate to maintain any kind of profits and stay afloat. And so it seems like they're going for more emotional reptilian brain content, anger, disgust, fear kind of stuff, sadness. So he says, you know, it's basically this thing saying, everyone calm down, there's no climate emergency, the planet isn't boiling, as like some guy from the UN was saying, and people, global boiling, it's ridiculous. And a lot of people have been posting things on social media I've seen where they're like, oh, my weather app for BBC or whatever says the temperature here is this, but on you know, they've got an article on bbc.com or whatever it is, maybe not BBC, but that they're saying, oh, the temperature is this in this place, it's so hot. And it's like, that's different to your weather app. Like, what's that all about? And I've seen a few people with those examples. So, you know, I don't know exactly. I'm just pointing out anomalies here. But so I don't know if perhaps there's no significant temperature change at the moment, or maybe there is, and but then here's the thing: temperature has gone up and down throughout time. In the medieval period, it was warmer than it is now. There was a little ice age, like in the mid 1800s, and when the Thames froze over in winter, and we're coming out of the little ice age. So it would make sense if our temperature was increasing, actually. I don't know if it is, but it would make sense because we've got not looking at Al Gore's chart from An Inconvenient Truth, which is like a very zoomed in part of the graph. If you zoom out from it, if he was being honest, which I've seen these graphs and these comparisons, if you zoom out for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, CO2 is very low, is definitely below average of historically in that time frame. And if there's not enough CO2, it's very dangerous for plants. Plant life will die, collapse. CO2 is plant food. Plants grow faster when there's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. And in a greenhouse, they speed up growth of vegetables and stuff by pumping it full of CO2. So it's not a pollutant. It's healthy. It's it's part of the planet. And it's all regulated through the oceans. I don't understand exactly. There's a great article called "Redemption of the Beast" by Randall Carlson. Randall Carlson, great guy. And so he's got it's like a 5-part series of articles online you can look up, and he's got some great podcast interviews where he talks about climate change. But basically, the thing is, for sure, the climate has been changing throughout time. We've had 5 ice ages or whatever, and things have gone up and gone down long before humans were doing anything. So natural climate change happens. So then the question is, A, do we have significant climate change right now? B, are we causing it, or are we adding to the natural climate change? Right? And C, if we are, then what are we doing to cause it? Is it carbon? Is it something else? Or is it, for example, carbon, as far as I can tell from looking into the thing, looking into this topic, I've seen charts where, and from several sources, where they are correlated, temperature change and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but it's the other way around. It's temperature goes up, and then about 800 years later, there's a lag, but I guess it takes time to register in the system or whatever. About 800 years later, the levels of CO2 go up. And then maybe that continues for a while, and then maybe it starts to plateau, the temperature plateaus. And then about 800 years later, the CO2 levels start to plateau. And then maybe the temperature starts going down. And about 800 years later, the CO2 levels start to go down. So it doesn't seem that CO2 is causing this. And I've never seen anyone address this. And it's not like, it's just like, conspiracy theorists, climate deniers. It's like, well, you're calling names. Like, surely if you had logical reasons, just from a pragmatic point of view, you want to get your point across. Surely if you had logic and evidence, you would be putting that forward first before mudslinging and name calling. So the fact that they're all resorting to name calling and fear and trying to intimidate people into not talking seems like they don't have evidence, right? So then, A, is there climate change happening? B, is part of it, because there's natural climate change throughout the eons, is any of it anthropogenic? Are humans causing any of it? And C, if we are, then what are we doing which causes it? And then D, can we reverse any of that? Can we safely reverse, or modify what we're doing if we are affecting the climate significantly? Now, here's a question. This seems unlikely based on what I understand, but if it is the case that we are significantly affecting the temperature on the planet, and maybe we are, from what I understand, that's not the case. But I've just watched an podcast today, RFK Jr. talking to some guy about this geoengineering expert on RFK's podcast, talking about chemtrails, right? Which is RFK is being skeptical, but saying like, well, what do you mean? What's the evidence for this? What's the sign? Because they say this. And he says, you know, in the end, he's saying like, yeah, you know, I think it's persuasive. And I agree. It's kind of persuasive what the guy's saying, but I don't know if it's true. But, and that's one of the things where I'm saying this, I'm being very candid with you, but, you know, part of me is like, oh, you should just say, I don't know, and stick to that. Even though honestly, I think like, oh, the guy made a very good, persuasive argument there. But yeah, I haven't looked into it in detail, so it could be totally wrong. But that's something where I always thought that's ridiculous. The idea that you know people are spraying aluminium or whatever from planes or whatever. But apparently he mentions a bunch of specific things, and RFK is like, yeah, that is true. That thing I know. And so it's like, huh. Like say the aluminium binds to. Naturally, you don't find it on its own in nature, but it's bound to silicates or something. And so in its free form, you only find after processing by humans. And that you find it, of course, near aluminium smelting plants. But unlike mercury or other things, it doesn't travel very far. It's got a certain range, and then it doesn't go further. And say in, forests up in Northern California, where there's no aluminium processing anywhere near, it's full of aluminium in the soil, and the levels have been increasing significantly. Apparently, this is what he's saying, right? This guest on the podcast there, and saying that seemingly he's making the case that there's like this global thing where governments are trying to combat climate change by putting these particulates into the atmosphere to block the sun, which is apparently, and he mentions a bunch of specific things. We're saying, oh, this person from NATO said this at this time. This person's on record saying that. This person's saying this. Lyndon Johnson, is on tape apparently saying, we can control the weather, and he who controls the weather controls the world. Things like that. Now, I haven't looked into these things, but there's this kind of thing where, it seems like it would be hard for this guy to get away with, peddling lies if he's being so specific on so many things. So that's one of the things where I'm like, okay. I honestly have better things to look into. I will look into this at some point, I'm sure, but right now it's not my priority. It's more like, okay, how do you wean babies off of milk? It's more relevant to me right now. But nonetheless, it's like, okay, for now, honestly, my feeling is, if I'm being honest with myself and not feeling like, oh, I don't want to be weird. It's like, well, yeah, that seems like plausible given that everything else I know about the shady stuff going on in the world. And you make a persuasive case. You seem calm. You don't seem like a crazy person. When you get contradicted, when RFK pushes back against him on certain things, he's, doesn't get like crazy emotional, uptight. He seems pretty reasonable. So, but I don't know. I think, that's, but that's one thing where, I would say, yeah, maybe, I don't know, it's possible. But so that guy's saying that actually climate change is being worsened. He's saying the temperature change is worse than people think. So that's different to what I've heard from other places, but I would keep an open mind to that too. Like, yeah, I don't know, maybe he's right, and say RFK thinks, yeah, the climate is warming based upon, he's a naturalist and he spends a lot of time in nature. And he says, since he watches the trees and, the temperature and stuff throughout his life, he's been in nature and it's getting hotter. So maybe that's fairly good evidence, I guess, if, he seems like he's got pretty good memory and good judgment and integrity. So maybe that is the case. But so anyway, climate change, I don't know exactly what's going on. Is it global warming? Is the temperature getting hotter around the world significantly? I do know their projections have been wrong over and over and over again. Like the ICCP, is that? Yeah. International, whatever it is. So International Climate Change Panel, I don't know, or Intergovernmental Climate Change Panel. But they, they censor. There's many dissidents, scientists who don't agree with what they say. There's also scientists who have said, hey, remove my name from these reports because you changed what I said, and politicized science. And there's also, what was I going to say there before? Their models have been off, say, oh, it's going to be 10 years time, we're going to be in this situation. And then we're not there. And then they say it again. For 30 years, apparently, they've been saying we'll be in disaster in 10 years time. they still expect us to believe it now about the next 10 years. It does seem there's a lot of alarmism in the media about this. Also, the ICCP and governments around the world, they give funding to scientists for studies involving climate change. So if you're a scientist and you're trying, it's hard to get funding. And if you're like, oh, I'm going to do a study which is related to frogs, it's hard to get funding. But if you go, oh, frogs and climate change, oh, here's some funding. There's a lot of funding for it. So a lot of it builds into this confirmation bias, which is not the scientific method. That's not science, right? That's religion, basically, or that's dogma and confirmation bias. And then also, there's a lot of scientists who they know their career, they've got families and stuff. Maybe they're trying to wean a baby from milk onto solids. And yeah, it doesn't really seem like a great idea to run up against the empire and say, oh yeah, this is all wrong. And then most people won't even believe you probably. And then you lose your career and, maybe your wife has some questions about your, judgment or whatever. And, it could be a real problem. Your family, you could, those pressures could break, relationships. And so it's a serious thing. A lot of people would be conscious that it's wrong. This is my guess, right? There's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I know there's something funny going on with this stuff. It's not science. It's not honest, The energy is wrong for starters. It's all control and domination and name calling. It's not like openness and calmness and logic, But I guess a lot of the scientists who are even putting forward these studies and putting their names to the ICCP stuff, would be like, yeah, this is wrong, but I'm not willing to go against it. Then there'll be others who are like, subconsciously they're aware that it's wrong, but they repress the awareness or they run from it. They let themselves. It's like the shadow, as Jung would call it, Carl Jung, and they're just like, pretending because they don't want to face it, and then there'd be others who genuinely believe in it, But I think that one thing is climate change, distracts from all these other environmental problems. People often, say like, oh, what's the biggest environmental problem facing the planet? Oh, climate change. Oh yeah, and what's the next two? Deforestation. Oh, yep, cutting down the forest. Yep, good, true. What else? It took you a while, but okay, good. What else? Nothing. It's like, okay. So there's so many other more urgent problems. Like if they are spraying aerosol, like aluminium in the geoengineering stuff, which apparently Bill Gates is heavily invested in, then that would be that's bad. That's very bad for your brain, aluminium, right? Then okay, that'd be a problem. I don't know if that is happening. I hope it's not. Probably is, unfortunately, it seems, but I don't know. With the where was I? With saying climate change, I think I was talking about drinking water actually. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, okay, I lost my train of thought. No bother. So anyway, yeah, okay, different environmental problems. There we go. Humility brings knowledge, hey? Like acidification of the oceans from fertilizer runoff, and overfishing, collapsing the fishing stocks, like dragnet fishing, dredging, dragnets. Heavy metals in rivers like mercury, all the USA apparently you can't, according to RFK again, you can't fish anymore in the lakes and the rivers of the USA. But I think apparently it's all those waterways are contaminated with mercury, which is toxic for your brain. Or is it maybe other heavy metals too? Oil spills. What else are there? Plastics in the ocean killing fish. EMF radiation from phones and stuff is actually non-ionizing radiation. It was cleared originally for use to roll out throughout society. They thought, yeah, it doesn't cause DNA damage. But then they found out eventually, apparently, they're like, oh, actually, well, I know they did find this out, but apparently it was later, that it causes oxidative stress on the body, which in turn causes DNA damage. So indirectly it does also, and now it's everywhere. And apparently, EMFs, like from all electrical things, like the microphone in front of me, the computer, they're emitting them to electromagnetic fields to some level. Apparently, they're actually really serious. Depending, of course, there's levels, but like if you got your phone to your head, people getting cancers. Apparently, a bunch of people get cancers from that. And that it apparently opens degrades the mitochondria and opens the blood-brain barrier, right? And I heard there was some Danish students who did some study where put 2 carrots, grow them, chop a carrot, put the end in a bit of water, see if it grows, and they put one next to a Wi-Fi router to see what would happen, what router or router, and it died. The other one grew fine. The one next to the router died. So I turn off my Wi-Fi every night, or if I leave the house for like 6 hours, we're going out, I turn off the Wi-Fi for my plants, So when in doubt, it's probably, it seems pretty clear. Anyway, so these are other environmental problems, and just, GMO spreading, GMO, we have barely tested these things. The bees, neonics and other, pesticides, which are, devastating insect populations, and thus birds, and causing collapse, chain reactions. There's a bunch of environmental things that, climate change just doesn't overlook. So, but yeah, anyway, so climate change is one thing where I think the whole thing, there's definitely a movement to kind of the whole net zero thing. It's like, oh yeah, my question I was going to ask you is it fair to sacrifice even if we were endangering the planet, which seems unlikely, and even if we could save it by going to net zero emissions by like 2030 or whatever, which is insane, way too fast, then if that came at the cost of causing millions of humans to die, would that be right? Would that be evil? I think if it was required to save the planet, then I think you go, okay, you first, like voluntarily, if you want to say, yeah, humans who want to stop using fossil fuels, all right, we're going to set up a system where you can live in cabins and, do that. That would be fair, voluntary. Forcing people to do it, no, that's evil. Basically the UN, some studies were done, I think, for the Millennium Goals. I think there's something from Jordan Peterson. He talked about that they found that the best way to deal with climate change was to actually make energy as cheap as possible, like fossil fuels, right? Make them widely accessible to the world's poor, because basically energy equals work, and you need energy as a cost everyone has. And the cheaper the energy, the more work you can do, the more more productive you can be, the more you can save. And then the more you can invest in yourself and your family and your community and build businesses, build economies. And so basically, if we made energy cheap and available throughout the world, people would get wealthier. And as people get wealthier, their their circle of concern widens. Instead of, if you're just trying to get food for the day without starving, fend off starvation for one more day, then for you and your family, then you don't care what's in the river. You don't care if you're polluting the river to get that food, or you're chopping down the last tree, to burn the wood for warmth. That's you're doing your duty within what needs to be done. But once you're a bit wealthier, you've got enough food in your bellies, then you start to think, well, what else is going on around my children, my family here, and what's in the river which we're drinking from, and what's in the air we're breathing, and naturally your environment starts to expand, and you start to care for it. And it's the same thing. So you look at all these billionaires in Davos or whatever. It's like, the rich apparently care about the environment, and mostly it seems from a selfish point of view, like, we need to protect ourselves, or we are going to die. It's like, also, it's not about generosity, it's just about self-interest. Okay. Or not about love, and reverence for Mother Nature. But the fact is, how did you get there? Because you got rich. So we help everyone else get rich. And this is what the studies showed, apparently, is that everyone would start taking care of the environment better, and we would move beyond these environmentally harmful practices. Instead, what they're doing is the exact opposite. They're basically increasing the harms to the environment by making fossil fuels more expensive. Oh, you have to go to green energy. You can't use this, can't do that. Disrupting things, bringing in too much bureaucracy, making things more complicated and less efficient. And, countless millions of people around the world are suffering from this. So now this isn't meant to be about climate change this episode, so I'll stop talking about it now. But basically, that'd be one thing where I think the whole climate change thing seems to be a very big cult. And, I don't know exactly where the truth lies in it. I know climate has changed throughout history. I'm sure it will keep changing. But are we contributing to that? And if we are, is it significant, or is it like, an ant contributing to the spin of the moon, Although there's no ants on the moon yet. Congratulations, India, getting to the moon. So I think that'd be something. So we got 9/11, central banks, climate change, chemtrails. What else to mention? COVID. The whole thing with COVID's extremely fishy. Like, I believe, again, you can look into it yourself. You could look up Majid Nawaz, Maajid space Nawaz, yeah, Nawaz, Majid Nawaz, great journalist. Him also, what's his name? Alex Berenson, who wrote Pandemia, former New York Times journalist who basically talked about the pandemic and like, hey, this is crazy, what's actually happening. You could go on Substack and look at, you can find real journalists who are being independent and they're not controlled by their newspapers, editors who are, newspapers are nowadays basically owned by all the major, say, around the world, I believe, but like, especially in the USA, which has a very large cultural influence. But all around the world, a very small number of corporations now control all of the mainstream media. And they also have a very powerful influence over governments because they can provide the election funding that gets the politicians in. The politicians choose the bureaucrats and the judges, and the whole the think tanks get money from these corporations. Money is very powerful, and it kind of guides the ecosystem and what the zeitgeist, what people believe in. And so there are, if we retrace our steps here, folks, we just follow blindly forward and let the universe give it to us. So COVID, right? There's a lot of money made, enormous wealth transfer from the middle class up to the billionaires, crushed the middle class all around the world, and the billionaires just got richer and richer. A lot of them, the people who are lobbying, for censorship of, or censoring, or lobbying the government to censor people, social media platforms, Amazon and stuff, Google. A lot of these big tech benefiting enormously from keeping people at home. Meanwhile censoring people who are saying, hey, we shouldn't be at home, this doesn't make sense, lockdowns don't make sense. And this was all proven true, the whole vaccine debacle, which proved at this point, as far as I understand it, those who are vaccinated are more likely to catch COVID now. And the whole thing, there was lies throughout the thing. It was never proved to even studied to prevent transmission. Apparently, the whole thing was actually run in the USA. The Moderna and Pfizer, they were just putting their names to the vaccines but it was actually run by the military under emergency use authorization, and the whole thing is insane. And now that's where it's like that gets pretty deep. But it seems like, I'll tell you what I think. This is what this whole episode is meant to be about, right? I don't know, but I think the whole COVID thing is a bunch of very powerful people who are disconnected from kind of humanist love. I'm sure they love their families in their own way and their tribes, their social circles. But it seems the best explanation is that some very powerful and very intelligent, very organized, but very cruel and very bad, so to speak. Their souls are good, but their minds are very bad, and they believe they are their minds. They're spiritually unconscious. Which you could call evil people, so to speak. Basically, some powerful, dominating people and networks thereof, and the systems they control and have developed control over generations, deployed a psychological war on the planet and to take power and to accelerate a pre-existing process of centralization of political control of the world in a unitary system where elites of various areas are cooperating to create, basically working together to get this prize of, this system which will benefit them all enormously and allow them all much more power over their own areas. So it's almost like the elites of all these countries stepping back to back, like in Gladiator, to kind of unite against everyone else. And, maybe not all the elites are involved. Maybe North Korea's not involved or something, or, maybe Iran's not involved. I don't know the details, but, again, if you want information, you can ask me, but you can look into, all kinds of, like Matt Taibbi talking about the censorship that went on with the FBI and CIA and military intelligence involvement in censoring discourse throughout COVID. The pharmaceutical industry and the media who were saying, anti-vaxxers and stuff, they're all owned by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, these huge, investment funds, and who, also own the arms contractors, who the military-industrial complex, they have a very large ownership there, which was developing these, vaccines seemingly. But so there's all these incestuous relationships of control and profit and motive, and it didn't come from a pangolin or whatever. There's no evidence for that. Like the whole thing, there's proof that very convincing proof that it almost certainly came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the COVID, and was developed by gain of function research through Anthony Fauci, who was told to stop doing this research under the Obama administration, and then through NIH funded it out to contractors through EcoHealth Alliance and a guy called Peter Daszak, I think, to China to get it done there, and then lied about it under oath to Congress and still hasn't been gotten in trouble for it. Also, Jeffrey Epstein's client list is still being kept secret by the judges for some reason, or the judge, first person ever to be found guilty of trafficking underage girls to nobody. Anyway, and so the COVID thing, and if you just look at the new normal, save hashtag save lives. The whole thing was a very slick psychological operation. It's come out through Majid Nawaz. He's got his Joe Rogan appearances are very good. And he's talked about like how he shows there, runs you through it on screen, like he's got, I got the receipts, Joe. I got the receipts. Members of elite British military psychological operations units were embedded in Twitter and stuff, and during this time, and the whole thing seeming, again, I'm not going to give you all. Part of me wants to just try to persuade you with these information that at least something's going on. But I'll just leave it there and say, look, there's so many weird things about the COVID thing. They kept changing the story, moving the goalposts, and the whole thing just feels totally wrong. And so many more people were killed by the lockdowns, marriages ruined, domestic violence caused, sexual abuse, child abuse, crime, overdoses, heart attacks, cancer, which could have been diagnosed but wasn't. And then from the vaccines, there's an enormous amount of injuries, and I believe these things are all established. That's one thing I'd say. I'm pretty sure that's all true. And so many people got the vaccines and have no problems, but there's a crazy, like something like 300 times more than normal side effects. Not like normal like vaccines where there's some side effects for some people, but it seems like scale orders of magnitude more with this. And why would people do that? Well, I mean, there's a lot of money made off of this, terrifying people and gaining control, political control, which still hasn't been ceded back. They've still got the authority to do this again, and some people say they're planning to do that. The WHO trying to get power through this pandemic treaty, where they'd be able to declare a pandemic unilaterally, and then all the governments of the world, formerly sovereign governments, would have to follow suit and do, what they're told, basically. But they're all controlled. WHO and these governments are already controlled by the same people, I think. But it would be formalized, legalized sort of farce, to make this seem legitimate. So yeah, the whole COVID thing, I think, was, yeah, like pretty basically a power grab, a global coup d'état, as Majid calls it. Now, and yeah, I think the death rate was very low from it as well. Compared, like, but look, people die. It's horrible. Um, I don't want to die right now. I mean, eventually I'll die. I'd say more or less at peace with that. But I don't want to die. You know, I'm enjoying life. And I don't want people I love to die. So it's anyone dying is sad for the people around them. Even if it's natural and part of life. And we're going back to where we came from. But and I don't believe it's the end. But nonetheless, like, for living here and not living under the ghostly shadow of fear, we need to be honest and say, look, the death rates from COVID seem to be basically the same as the flu, or similar to the flu, very similar. And that was entered into Hansard as a matter of parliamentary record in the UK. Like, what, there's a question, I think, like, what is the rate? And they had to say, And so, like that, that they're not meant to be lying there, and they have no interest in lying, so they have to say, okay, here's the thing. And I think it was 0.1%, something like that. Or was it 0.01%? I think it was 0.096% or something. So basically like a percent of a percent. Whereas they were saying, oh, it's 1% of people, or it's 5%, or it's like, and this skewing the death rate. They're saying cases with COVID, not. So again, I won't go into too many details there, but like, people dying with COVID from other things, were counted as a COVID death. So COVID, fishy stuff. What else do I think that you might be like, what? You're kidding me. I think aliens are probably real. US military has been saying that recently. They could be trying another psychological operation, laying the groundwork for something or other, who knows. But yeah, I think the universe is probably full of life, and it seems like John Mack, the Harvard psychologist, interviewed a bunch of alien abductees. He called them experiencers, because a lot of them, they didn't say they were taken up in a craft. They said, it happened while I was in bed, or I was driving and it happened. I just lost time and I don't know what happened. And a lot of them, some would say, yeah, it seemed like I was in a spaceship. Others would say, no, it was like I was in a room, a medical room. And the others were like, I was like in a cave, and it was kind of like jeweled walls, stuff. And all of them are very similar to, but he said they seemed totally sane, except for this one thing. They said they had these experiences, and a lot of them, they didn't seem to be very happy that it was happening. They were resisting it, but it was happening. It wasn't like they're looking for attention. And then a bunch of them had rather profound messages where, the beings told me we have to protect the earth and nature, and we have to elevate our consciousness. And I was like, this is pretty strange. And so that's pretty weird. He's like, they don't say, he said, by the end, he believed in it. Like, I think that this challenged my view of reality, but I believe, there's some sort of, maybe not in physical space, but maybe also, or it could be that, or in other dimensions, these beings in other dimensions which we can't see, and so he kind of came to that point of view. And then separately, you have Dr. Rick Strassman, who did research on DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the strongest psychedelic known to man, or woman. No, man in the meaning humans, right? And he, gave them, levels of, this psychedelic drug, and, people had these experiences, hallucinations and beautiful geometric patterns. Gave people more. They'd have these, spiritual experiences of like your oneness with reality, and, overcoming addictions and great epiphanies and stuff. Gave them really high doses, and they would experience being like sent off in a rocket through like a psychedelic glowing chrysanthemum celestial sky flower, bing, into some other dimension, and there'd be beings waiting for them who would say like, oh, we're so glad you found this technology, and this is amazing, we can communicate. And they'd be trying to talk to them and show them shapes and doing impossible things, and just trying to communicate to them. And some of them were not friendly also. One of them encountered like these crocodile kind of beings that raped him, and he was a hippie, and he cut his hair, and he like never, apparently, like just went straight and narrow from then on. Like, but the thing is, these volunteers, they weren't in communication with each other, and they were all experienced meditators. So they had that basic ability to be calm. And Rick Strassman, they were all, he was like, what is going on? They're all saying, all of them, when you give them high doses, are reporting these experiences. I think all of them, or nearly all of them, but I think it was all of them. And he's like, is this like a hallucination in the mind? Is this like a dream kind of thing, or is this real? But the experiences, they would all say like it was realer than real. It's like, this is the dream. That was realer. That was like waking up from the dream. And it's like, okay. And shockingly also, it's the reason I mentioned it just now is like, it seems almost identical to what John Mack was recording of these people saying they've been abducted by aliens. So seemingly, possibly these aliens, so to speak, are actually just in another dimension. Maybe they can come into the physical dimension too, but are just in another dimension, and seemingly have been documented from two different scientific standpoints. And people all around the world have these experiences. And throughout history, these experiences are there. You've, flying saucers or discs in the sky being spotted throughout time, and there's paintings and engravings from, ages ago, Japan and, Europe and all over the place, Africa, talk about the sky people and stuff. But then also Graham Hancock has a lecture called Aliens, Angels, Elves, and Ayahuasca, I think, talking about how when you take ayahuasca, which contains DMT, ayahuasca gives you these long trips where you experience, these visions, and you can, almost everyone, encounters seemingly intelligent beings who like the DMT thing. But then, so the shamans would call them spirits, but then they seem, Graham shows how throughout, in various cultures throughout time, it seems that it's the same entities being described from different angles. So our culture calls them aliens because we're a technological culture. We imagine them out there in spaceships. But the shamans of the hunter-gatherer kind of tribes called them spirits. And then the Irish called them fairies. And then they're called elves in Europe, Europe elves or whatever, or angels in Christianity or whatever, and so, and they're all very similar experiences, the people who seem to encounter these things. So that's one thing where it's like, maybe they're just all around us, and that's just the way it is, I think that's true, probably. I haven't had a personal experience, but I think so. Let's see, what else? Let's mention that. Vaccines before. Like, I think vaccines, maybe there's some vaccines which are good for you. I wouldn't rule that out, possibly. But from my understanding of doing a lot of research into it, I think actually these are going to be seen as like lobotomies or leeching or electroshock therapy, crazy. I think there's some beneficial electroshock stuff they do these days, maybe tiny little pulses. But there's like the Townes Van Zandt guy, like the musician. He, when he was younger, had I think electroshock therapy, and it like fried his brain. Like he lost all his long-term memory, like a lot of his long-term memory. So there's all these things throughout time where the medical profession's been doing things, and then we find out, doctors are only human too, and like anything, ego can get involved. People can be, this is right. This is what I've been telling people for 40 years. It can't be wrong. I'm not going to change my mind and look stupid, or lose my job. Someone else gets my job. Or just people who just genuinely believe and they haven't noticed the evidence. Otherwise, I think vaccines are probably like that. A few, again, you can look into it. Look at Children's Health Defense and interviews with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talking about vaccines. He does a great job. If you watch Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience recently, I think you'll find like, A, he should be president, and B, like you'll learn a lot about a lot of things. It's incredibly detailed knowledge about so many topics, and he's so humble the way he presents it, but it's very clear. And he says what he doesn't know. He's like, they say, what do you think about, what do they do, why are they doing this? And he'll say, I prefer not to try to look into people's heads. I try to stick with evidence, which is funny because he's accused of the opposite, of being, crazy or whatever. But yeah, and so he talks about vaccines, does a very good job. But in a nutshell, I would say a few things just to mention, make you aware of from the get-go, is diseases. We're told vaccines saved us from all these diseases. But actually all those diseases were already in decline before the vaccines were introduced. Go online, you can see Google Images, you can see charts showing when the vaccines were introduced, it's like when 80% of the reduction to date of the disease prevalence was already achieved. And there was 1951, I think, guy, I just took a photo of it recently because I was going to look into it more. I think RFK had mentioned it too, but I saw it on Twitter, where it's saying a guy who wrote a book where they're basically, I think, nutritionists. There's some sort of, scientists who were saying the vaccinologists are going to try to claim, and they are claiming, that they, or did they say they will or they are? I'm not sure. Victory for, and the credit for, reducing diseases. But actually it wasn't them. It was basically engineering solutions. It was improved farming methods, providing more and better food, roads with linking, and transportation and stuff, allowing oranges from more temperate climates to be taken up to northern climates where people could get the vitamin C from it. Public sanitation, like this kind of stuff. Basically engineering improvements, and not at all, seemingly nothing or almost nothing from vaccines, and possibly even some evidence that vaccines, were causing negative effects. And I would guess that's probably the case. Let's see here. What is that guy? Here it is. Vaccination proved useless and dangerous from 45 years of registration statistics. Alfred R. Wallace, LLD. So I'm going to look at that later. But anyway, and so in a nutshell, like the old vaccines, they were live virus vaccines. So they could spread the virus. Like maybe you get a bit of the virus, and let's say the vaccines work. I'm not sure if they actually do. I've heard people say that they don't, in given reasons, which I can't totally remember right now. But statistics I've looked into which say this. But let's say give the devil his due. Let's say be generous here and just say steelman the argument. Let's say vaccines do work there. When they were introduced after all this benefit was achieved. But so let's say even if they were doing something beneficial to some extent, right? Even if the live virus vaccines was helping you protect you from a disease, then it could mutate in your body and spread to other people, and then be more dangerous and kill other people. So there was a problem in that they were stopped, the live virus vaccines. So instead they killed the virus and injected it in you. But then it didn't do anything. It didn't provide an immune response. As Aubrey Marcus says in his interview with RFK Jr., which was good podcast, he says it's like a bunch of dead soldiers wash up on the beach, and the countries, the military, like, do we need to mobilize a response? No, all good. These guys are dead, no problem. Like the body's intelligent and knows what's going on. And so there's no immune response, no antibody response. So what the modern vaccines do is they put something called an adjuvant, ADJUVANT, an adjuvant, into the vaccine, which is something extremely toxic, usually mercury or aluminium. And this is still happening now. For sure, mercury ones, Bill Gates is giving to millions of people in Africa as we speak. He's been doing it for ages. And aluminium too, I think. And in for sure, still the vaccines which people were trying to give my daughter they have aluminium in them. And then I think some of them have mercury too. All the pregnancy ones, I believe some of them in Ireland still have mercury. I think thimerosal. But for sure, like aluminium, right? Which is actually just as bad, I think. Either just as bad or worse, or only a little bit better. I can't remember which, but very bad. And so basically, the whole point is that they need an adjuvant to create an immune response, so that your body will remember. It confuses, presuming this stuff works, right? What happens is your body confuses the toxicity from the adjuvant, like say aluminium, with the dead virus. And so next time when you're exposed to the virus, the immune response is activated. But the thing is, it's extremely toxic. You're putting extremely toxic substances into your body, like aluminium. And what's that doing? And it turns out, apparently, it seems the vaccine, industry, they don't really, they're one of the only, I think they're the only medical product which doesn't have to do trial safety testing, licensure safety testing, because originally they were under a military thing with the USA, where they were, in case like the Russians attack, with some biological weapon, the US would be able to take the thing, isolate it, make a vaccine against it, and quickly deploy it to all Americans. So they needed it to be immune to safety testing. But then basically the vaccine schedule was massively expanded over time, and it became a huge. And basically, it was about to go out of business, and they all got together and went to the U.S. government, like in 1980, mid 80s, and said, "Look, we're going to stop making vaccines." The U.S. government's like, no, we need you in case there's a biological attack, and they said, they're unavoidably unsafe. They were the direct quote. Vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, so you need to provide full liability, remove liability for us. So if someone gets hurt from these products we make, then the taxpayers with a vaccine court will judge the claims and pay out those injuries. We're not going to be responsible. Otherwise, we're not making them anymore because it's too expensive. And the government agreed and made 1986, I believe, the Vaccine Act. I can't remember the exact name, something like that. And basically, it removes liability. So then all these huge corporations said, oh, wait a minute, we can make these products, which everyone has to take because they're scheduled, they're mandated, like for school and stuff. So we don't even have to do marketing. And there's no danger. We can make them as quickly and recklessly as we want. And there's no one, we don't have to pay for it. And then they made a lot of money, and then they started lobbying more and more the government and expanding the schedule by 20 times, making all these new vaccines, and which people don't even need, like things like hepatitis B, where it's like, unless you're sleeping with some prostitute who's been around a lot, or sharing needles, then you're not going to get it. But they give it to babies. So what's that all about? And all of these contain adjuvants, which are extremely toxic, and they get into the basically, apparently the vaccinologists, they don't actually look at where they got rid of the toxicologists, from the industry, basically, and said because we don't need them. And the toxicologists would be like, where are the aluminium, the adjuvants? Where is that ending up? Is it going out through the feces? Is it being sweat out? Is it going into the blood? Is it going to the brain? What's happening to it? And they couldn't answer. They didn't care. They didn't know. Whatever. It's just up. The more toxic it is, the better immune response we get, and that's good for getting these vaccines licensed. That's the one thing we need to think about. And apparently there's a lot of connection with allergies, where if people have got an adjuvant in their system from having a vaccine, and then they're stroking a cat, or they're eating peanuts, or they're with flowers, then the body confuses that input with the just like they would with a dead virus, with the immune, the toxicity from the adjuvant. And so you could get allergic to cats, get allergic to peanuts or whatever, potentially. Also, it's connected to seemingly, I believe, again, you can look up the evidence if you want. I can ask me if you want more evidence, things to point you to. But autism and developmental disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, learning difficulties and disorders, of course not all of them, but a lot of them, there's been an enormous increase. Autism has skyrocketed in the last in recent years, recent decades, since the vaccine schedule has massively increased. It's not just the US. Again, they've got a very powerful influence all around the world, and it's throughout the Western world this has been happening, and even beyond. And so allergies have skyrocketed, autism skyrocketed, and other neurodevelopmental disorders, and learning difficulties like ADD and stuff like this. And this say RFK Jr. said he got into the vaccine thing because all these mothers he was environmental lawyer decades, and suing polluters for dumping mercury into the water and getting mercury into the fish, and he knew it was like pregnant mothers were being told you mustn't eat the fish because there's mercury. It's dangerous for the baby. But then these mothers kept coming up and sitting in the front row of his lectures as he'd be going around talking to people about, raising awareness of, pollution, what's going on, trying to resist it. They would kind of go there and they'd say, wait, get that arrive early and then wait. And then after it, they would talk to him and say, why aren't you talking about vaccines? And they basically say like, why is it? And then eventually, RK said he was dragged kicking and screaming into it. And then I got a lot of my information through him, but then I've checked it with all the other sources, done my own research. But he speaks very eloquently and clearly and knowledgeably about this. But basically they were saying, why is it not okay for a pregnant woman to eat fish with mercury, but then we're going to inject her with these vaccines which contain mercury? And, it's a good question. And I think that still, given that aluminium is similarly toxic to mercury, you can't just say, oh yeah, but that's the past. Mercury is still being given to pregnant women and people in general, but also even when it's being replaced with others, like they need something toxic. Otherwise it doesn't do anything. If it's not a live virus vaccine, and I think almost none of them are anymore, then it will have no effect unless there's something toxic with it. That's just the basic crux of it, adjuvants. So I think these are going to be like, we're going to look, and then the things where they've done studies comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated kids. Unvaccinated are healthier. In Africa, they did, like, I think Ghana, they had 30 years of medical records, and they showed that actually, I think the vaccinated people for certain things, I think it said that they had a lower rate of, it seems like they were having lower rates of that particular illness that it was vaccinated against, but they died much, much more often because in general, their immune systems and their health was compromised. So those who were vaccinated were less healthy by a statistically significant margin. And, I could go on and on. But like basically, I think this whole thing, and if you look at the articles talking about it, it's all, again, hateful, derogatory, name, throwing, name calling, and not a lot of science. And say, oh, that study about the connection to autism was debunked. It's like, yeah, but I've seen like 20 videos of mothers saying, this is my autistic child. He was totally, speaking fine and stuff. And then, the day he got the vaccine, the next day he started acting weird and he never came back. Now, you can say, oh, Jamie, you're being irresponsible. Am I? Or are we being irresponsible if we ignore all these parents who have kind of lost their children to, their children's still there, but like there's a wall between them and their child. The child can never fully flower into their full potential. It's pretty tragic, I would say, and disrespectful if we don't acknowledge the truth here, And maybe you have a different opinion on the truth. That's all good. I'm open-minded. Could be wrong about things as well. I'm going to turn on the light. One moment. I must have been giving details, given I need to turn on the light. The sun's going down. But let's see what else. So yeah, vaccines, I think. Basically, a lot of the articles, they'll be very not so much using logic, but emotion, which isn't a good sign. And then often also I notice from reading through them, there'll be all these sleights of hand where it'll saying something about, and I did a lot of research when I had my baby because I of course want to protect my child. And in doing a lot of so we didn't give her any because I don't think they're good for people, actually, after what I've learned, although I got a lot of vaccines when I was a kid. And even when I was an adult, I got some. But yeah, and so, for example, like reading articles where it would be saying, oh yeah, this proves this. And the article I'd be reading was from the point of view of pro-vaccine. But I'd go read through it, I have to read all sides of these things to figure out what's going on. Be very open-minded, Thankfully, my beautiful partner, as partner in crime, was kind of having the opposing view. And so that was very good. We were able to kind of tease it out together by checking each other and, questioning each other. And so that was great. But anyway, I would notice, say, from these articles that there'd be something where it's saying, oh, it's rock solid. And then there'd be one word where it would say, may cause blah, blah, blah. And I would be thinking look, if you had evidence, you would say does cause. Why are you saying may? you know, and there'd be these tiny things like that where there's all these little holes. I think it's a house of cards, basically. I think, you know, I don't. So that'd be my opinion. All right. Anything else? Let's see. I'll try and keep these a bit more concise now for you. Oh yeah, I think Atlantis was real. Okay. I think who knows what they called themselves, but an advanced antediluvian civilization. So pre-flood civilization. The sea levels rose by 100 meters, 400 feet, like 12,800 years ago or so, or 11,600. One of the two. One of the ends of the Younger Dryas, which is 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. And seemingly the Earth was struck by a debris stream from a giant comet, from the Taurid meteor stream, and it basically obliterated a lot of the Earth, caused continental-wide wildfires, made all the greater megafauna extinct, like the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tigers, the American lion, American horse, all kinds of things. And a lot of whom, when you look at them, they all look like very sudden deaths, like they're back on their haunches and their legs are just snapped, and they're frozen with undigested plant matter in their belly. It's like the temperature froze very, very quickly. You know, how are they eating plant matter if it was frozen already? And then now it's frozen within, like, and it seems from the record, temperature shifted by, like, you know, huge amounts, much more than global warming is predicting, within like a few years, or even like, I don't know, I can't remember. Look at Randall Carlson for that stuff, and Graham Hancock, who talks about the Atlantis stuff, like with the fingerprints of the gods, and then magicians of the gods. Magicians of the Gods might be the best place to start, because that was in 2015. The original one, fingerprints, was in 1995, and they're pointing out that the Sphinx has like thousands of years of rainwater erosion on it, but it hasn't rained in the Nile for a long, long time. So seemingly it's very old, like 10,000 years old or something, at least. And then Egyptologists were like, oh, that's impossible. But the geologists were like, hey, Egyptologists, sorry, that's rain erosion. That's not wind erosion. You can't get out of it. So, but they're like, well, where's all the other evidence? It's like, well, nothing but stone really lasts. So, everything would be obliterated, especially if there's a comet hitting the Earth and, like things got utterly destroyed. Incredible chaos. Randall Carlson's very good for, he's got a podcast himself, or he's on the Rogan podcast a lot. But Cosmographia with a K is his podcast. But he talks a lot about just the devastation of that change. It's really crazy. The Göbekli Tepe was then discovered, in the early 90s, or late 90s, was it? After this whole debate, and it's like 12,800 years old, or around that. And it was intentionally filled in and buried all at once. We don't know why. But it's astronomically aligned, extremely advanced. It's the oldest work of megalithic architecture. Well, actually, I think the oldest would be Gunung Padang, which also Hancock talks about, which is, I believe, the oldest parts they found. It's like this pyramid, which they thought was a mountain, but it's actually a pyramid inside a terraced pyramid in Indonesia. That means the mountain of enlightenment, or the mountain of light, Gunung Padang. And they've got drilled into it, and it was stopped by the local archaeologists. I think they stopped it, and with political pressure. But Danny, what's his name, Kura or something, Silabang Bang, I can't remember his name. Cool name. Anyway, was looking into it, this archaeologist, and I think that they drilled down, and the oldest parts they found were, I think, like 28,000 years old or something really crazy. But humans were meant to only be making cities like 5,000 years ago. But for sure, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is like 12,000 years old. And then they found Karahan Tepe also. And these places are like, Göbekli Tepe is 50 times bigger than Stonehenge. And it's astronomically aligned, really advanced architecture. So you'd need engineers, you'd need an agricultural surplus, you'd need specialists, you'd need political institutions to control everyone, you need a culture to rally everyone around. It's like really advanced. So hunter-gatherers doesn't seem likely they could have made that. So anyway, but I think Atlantis existed. I think probably actually at the triple junction of the European, African, and American plates, where the Azores is now. It's actually, when the sea levels were 100 meters lower, it would have been a big island. Also, it seems like, because of the plates, it seems like there's evidence. Randall talks about, he's got a thing, Plato's Atlantis back to the source. And he goes to Plato, which is where we get the story of Atlantis, which, by the way, every culture around the world, I think all the major cultures, like hundreds of cultures, talk about, we humans were very advanced and then we got wiped out in a flood. And we had to start all over again, like children with no memory of what went before. And, this is all around the world. People have this, our founders long, long ago were refugees from this lost civilization. And, in the West, it's like the Atlantis story or Noah's flood. But, and so, Plato is, venerable old Plato is the source for the Atlantis story. And when he's giving it there, he's saying he got it from from Solon, who was, I think, his ancestor, like his, Solon passed it down to, or was the guy he's talking, I can't remember. There's like a few chains of Dropitus, Solon to Dropitus to something. Anyway, there's like, but it's like a pass through the family, I think, and then to Plato, or maybe Plato's in the family, can't remember. Whatever, a few steps of separation, but it's like solid, passed it down the story. And he says, basically, he's talking, Solon went to Egypt, like, people go to America these days or England to study, Egypt was the elder civilization, and so the Greeks would go there to study, and Solon was there, and the priest in the temple there is talking to him and saying, you Athenians, you don't know, nothing of what went before. And he tells him about how, Egypt was a legacy, not a development. It was, and the most amazing stuff in Egypt is the oldest stuff, which fits in with this, seeming fact that it was founded by refugees of a higher lost civilization. But the old, the later architecture and art and temples is not as strong and not as advanced. And the stuff in Egypt we can't replicate, like things where it's like it bores 50 times faster than diamond-tipped drilling technology. We're like, we don't know how they did this. Anyway, and they found cocaine in like Egyptian mummies and stuff, and it's like, what? Crazy stuff. But the priest says to Solon, this advanced civilization was destroyed in a flood. And Solon says, when did this happen? And the priest says, 9,000 years ago. Which is pretty crazy. Imagine just being like, we have history from 9,000 years ago. He said, and we can go through it at your leisure in the sacred register. And as Randall Carlson says, to check out that sacred register. Take a peek. That would be good. But possibly that was all lost in the Library of Alexandria being burnt. Who knows? Or is it buried somewhere in Egypt? Who knows? Or in London. The Vatican. So it just so happens that Solon, we know when Solon was there from, historical record. We know the timelines. And that was 9,600 BC, which is 11,600 BC from us. 11,600 years ago from us, given that we're 2000 AD, right? And it just so happens at exactly that time, there was a huge increase of sea level, 100 meters. Was that a coincidence that the Egyptian priest was talking all this talk, bluffing about knowing about some, lost civilization got, swamped in the sea, huge sea level rises 9,000 years ago. Where do you get that number? Turns out it's like exactly correct, interesting. And there's all these other things though, but it seems like, he says through the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, out, in the ocean there. And so it's kind of not clear where exactly he meant, but from this thing, Randall goes through the source with Plato and goes through it bit by bit. And I learn a lot from that. It's really cool. Highly recommend that. I think it's 33 quid to watch it, or maybe it's not behind a paywall anymore. I don't know, but very much worth it. It's like 6 hours. It goes into great depth. Plato mentions 3 times in that story, this is not just a story, this is fact. Like, goes to the point of saying it 3 times, in the story. Like, this isn't just a parable, like a metaphor. This is literally true. Why would they put that in 3 times if it wasn't, Plato, like, who we get so much from, he's so respected, but we think, that was an exception. He just went off, board. He's had too much of the Eleusinian mystery that day. Anyway, but it seems like there's Randall in that thing he talks about that also that point where the Azores are has been sunken, the plates, depression of the plates, due to the ice. Like I think was it the ice coming off elsewhere, pushing those plates down, counterbalance, something like that. But anyway, it seems like it would have been a huge kind of like a kind of continent in the middle of the around the Azores there. It would have been very fertile. The Gulf Stream, we know, went all around it at that point. It would have been very temperate during the Ice Age. And that, it's, a lot of things about it seem to match the descriptions of Atlantis, like, there were cold and hot streams flowing together. They have that on the Azores. Or like, flowers of all kinds of descriptions, great for biodiversity of flowers and stuff. There's like all kinds of things there where it seems to match up, and it's like, that's very uncanny. Anyway, so but it seems like Atlantis was a global civilization. And there's hunter-gatherers all around the place who weren't part of it, just like there's hunter-gatherers these days who are not part of our civilization, our global technological civilization. And we could collapse, and they might not know about us, and they might go on and develop the new thing in 20,000 years and have no idea we were even here. And my microphone won't have survived. Nothing except stone will still be here, and this may have happened several times. Atlantis may not be the first, these reboots of civilization. Maybe it's like God's like, all right, let's do this again. Let's, start a new campaign, start a new game. But it seems like Atlantis had outposts all over the place, but that was the heartland, the Azores. Although Jimmy Corsetti, another kind of researcher guy about this kind of stuff, he thinks there's a area, I think, in the West Africa, which was all green back as recently as a few thousand years ago. It's full of lakes and rivers, all of sub-Saharan Africa. By the way, the Sahara is shrinking, getting greener. And Egypt was green back in the day and incredibly more fertile, which is amazing to think about, so there's this structure there. What's it called? I can't remember right now. It'll come to me, should I say? It's like these concentric rings which match the description of the city of Atlantis. Randall Carlson's like, I don't know about that. Just doesn't think. I think last I checked, doesn't think it quite fits. But Jimmy Corsetti thinks it does for other reasons. But anyway, who knows exactly where these things are? But it seems, for sure something was there. And there's things like Antarctica appearing in maps from like the 1500s. We discovered the West, modern kind of civilization discovered Antarctica in like 1800, 1820 or 1800. And before that, there's maps from like 1790 and there's nothing on the bottom. But then the older maps, there's like a geographically correct mapping of Antarctica on several maps. Orontius Phineas map, Piri Reis map, there's a bunch of them. And they would say, they're made like in the medieval times, but they're saying these are, they would be like based on many other source maps, which were falling apart at that time from like 1,000 years before or 500 years before. And a lot of these had, perfect longitude. And we only solved the problem of longitude, I think, in 18 something. So where before that, ships used to be crashing into rocks all the time because they would think they were further east than they were, or whatever. They wouldn't realize they were at land yet, and in the night they crash into the rocks and all get killed. And so it wasn't John Harrison eventually invented the chronometer, which allowed you to compare your position to the stars and this clock which you had. I can't remember exactly how it works, but like with calculus, I think you can figure out where you are. And but before that, like mapping, they could east and west, like the longitude. It was very confusing. It was quite inaccurate on the maps. There's these ancient maps of which have Antarctica on it with correct, mapping and in one case at least, subglacial topography. It shows the land correctly under the ice. It's like, so is that when there wasn't ice there? Like, what's that? Or did they had the technology to scan it? These people who have 50 times more powerful than than modern diamond tip drilling, I don't know. But yeah, also perfect longitude, which is like, well, very advanced mathematics. It's pretty crazy. And a lot of the stuff in Egypt, these huge stones, like how do they move this stuff? Anyway, whatever. So Atlantis I think was real. Anything else? Let's see. I believe in reincarnation. probably. There's a bunch of Dr. Ian Stevenson from Boston University went around the world following up stories of children who said they remembered past lives, and it turns out before kids grow up too much, a lot of kids remember they claim to remember past lives. In certain cultures, that's the parents discourage that. Hey, don't say that anymore. Or get rid of that. Don't think about that. But in other cultures like India or whatever, it's like, yeah, of course, And so they're maybe even encouraged, like, oh, tell me about it. Like, oh yeah, my old mummy and my old family, I used to do. And he went around and tracked them down and interviewed them and just see what they say. Recorded the detail like a good scientist. And then from them, some of them he was able to go, okay, there's some specific enough information here. This sounds like it's in Scotland or Scandinavia or something. Let's go scout it out. And we'd go and do research and try to find and corroborate things. And there's cases where, like, I think the Isle of Skye in Scotland, there's some boy born in Pakistan or something. And this, Dr. Stevenson or whatever, goes to the Isle of Skye and finds there was this house, which was like this red house by the rock there, and there was a boy who drowned, and there was a dog or something. Things were like really uncanny, similarities and connections. And I believe in the end, he I think publicly he didn't say, he was like, remaining impartial, but I believe he in the end concluded it was real. Not sure though. But, and then if you think about it, I think it's 50-50. Either when we die, that's the end, or it's not the end. Have you died? I haven't died, as far as we know. So we don't have evidence, right? Like, either it is or it isn't, right? 50-50, it seems. You could go, no, it's 100-0. But then you're being religious, ironically, if you do that, because you don't have evidence for that, I'm not saying it's 100% likely reincarnation's real. I'm just saying 50%, it seems like, yeah, either there's something after or there's not. And what exactly form do we go to heaven? Is it like some reincarnation as a human, reincarnation as another animal? Are you like an alien on another planet? Do you turn into a star? Are you just the universe and you just wait till it's like dodgeball? You just wait till everyone's gotten out and then, everyone goes back in again? Or what is it? I don't know. But it's, a lot of people also undergo past life hypnosis, regression therapy, and feel like they recall past lives. I did it once and it wasn't really, it was like a dream. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I was just making it up. It was really, and I kind of, I don't know, I think the way my mind works a bit, I was a bit difficult to get into it. I wanted to do it perfect. I didn't want to mess up and I didn't want to trick myself. And so I found it very difficult at first she was like, what do you see? I was like, I don't know. I was getting a bit anxious. That gets you out of it's all about relaxation, the hypnosis, And then I'm thinking, am I going to get if I get too stressed, then if I worry about getting stressed, I'm going to get more stressed. So it's, self-fulfilling prophecy. So I had to get over that at the beginning. But once I got into it, say, for example, I had a memory of being a mother and having children, and basically in the end, what I felt was that we were Jewish and we were persecuted by the Nazis, and my son got shot, and my husband had been sexually abusing me and I think one of the kids or something. And it's really crazy, because it was like I was crying my eyes out. Like I don't think I've ever cried like that before. And I could barely, I was trying really hard to breathe, and I meditate and stuff. So I was, and Wim Hof method, and so I was trying to control my breathing really well. And the hypnotist, like regression lady, therapist was like, just breathe. And I was like, I'm trying. It's just overwhelming waves of emotion. And that was very interesting. I was like, okay, I don't know if that memory was real, but like that emotion, where did that come from? Like, why would that come up so strong? It's very strange. And so I feel like that probably was real, but I don't know. But my brother had an experience being in Elizabethan England, like plotting stuff, and then everyone getting killed and just being like terrified running through the forest and feeling so guilty, like they're all dead. What I remember him telling me that and looking in his eyes, I was like, that looks like a memory. That doesn't look like imagination. So, these little pieces of the puzzle, I think at least we could say it's 51% likely reincarnation's real, 49%, 51 to 49, but I don't know. And yeah, people talk about, like, say, someone who like out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, NDEs and OBEs, but near-death experiences, like a guy who apparently was a cardiologist, a heart doctor, a surgeon, and I haven't looked into this deeply, but I believe this is true. And there's many other people who talk about this sort of thing, but that he was operating on someone and they died, but then they came back to life. They managed to bring them back to life. And the person said like, oh, I went up, I saw a bright light, I went towards the light and all these, people I loved and knew were there and they're waiting for me and they're so happy for me. But then they said, it's not your time, you have to go back, and I didn't want to leave, but, I had to go back and here I am. And a lot of people have that story, this stereotypical bright light thing. And like, there's these orbs of light there greeting you and they're like souls and you know them. And a lot of people say that. And then the doctor's like, yeah, sure, you're fine. It's just, oxygen deprivation to the brain. You'll be okay, whatever. And the guy's like, yeah, by the way, why is there's like a shoe? So, there's a pair of shoes on the roof of this hospital. I don't know why they're there. And they're like, what? And then they looked into it and they were a pair of shoes on the roof, apparently. And then the cardiologist was like, oh shit, my life is a lie. And like went on this kind of spiritual awakening and got into the whole thing of near-death experiences. But yeah, so, all right, what else? I believe the universe is alive and conscious. I believe, we're all one. We're basically like, I'm Jamie here. I'm this human being. But, where am I? Am I inside my head? Am I behind my eye? Am I behind my nose? Where do I begin? Like here's, the microphone is a physical object. I can scan it with my attention. Okay, there it is. I can scan with my imagination kind of, but my attention, the table behind me, and see, like, imagine it there. Okay, it's just there in 3D space. I can do the same thing with my head. Now, whereabouts in my head is me? Is it my eyebrow? Is it my blue iris? Is it the blood, inside, the eye vessels or whatever? Is it the retina? Is it just behind the retina? Am I hanging out just behind the retinas? Am I in the optic nerve? Am I in the brain? Just hanging out in the brain? I don't remember. I don't see the brain around here. Am I in the brain? And if you cut my brain open, please don't. Will you see? I see like colors here. I see all, these colors. I'm not going to see blue and green in my brain, am I? So where are these colors happening? Basically, I think it seems like we're all kind of inside the mind of God. It's like, I am not this body. I'm not these thoughts or this mind or these emotions. This is a character I'm playing, but I am the actor. You are the actor. We are all basically God in this form, God living as this little form here. And through spiritual practices, you can connect to your greater self, our greater self, as the whole universe. But it's kind of like we're a branch on the tree. I'm a little twig on the tip of the branch. And then there's I'm part of a bigger kind of branch, but still pretty twiggy, which is, say, my family. And then that's part of this bigger branch, which is, let's say Ireland, genetically, right? And perhaps spiritually. Although, Australia too, spiritually, connection there for sure. But let's just, for the metaphor, let's say bigger branch is Ireland, so my family and all these other families there, part of that. And then that part of European, that bigger branch, which also has, Hungarians, Swedes, Italians, whatever, there's other branches on that. But it's all, the tips of this this European branch, but they're not separate to it. They're the end of it. They're just the tippy, little divergent end part. It's still the branch. And then that is itself just a tip of this bigger branch, which is humans, which is itself part of a bigger branch, which is animals, or mammals, which is part of animals, which is part of life, or Earth, Gaia, Earth, which is part of, Milky Way, which is part of the universe and life, And so we are the whole tree, but we're also this little branch, this tiny little part. I am Jamie. I'm also Migloo. I'm also Ireland. I'm also Europe. I'm also humanity. I'm also mammals. I'm also animals. I'm also Gaia. I'm also the Milky Way. I'm also the universe. And the one in the all and the all in the one. And I believe you can if you meditate, just focus on your breath. Do some vipassana, breathing meditation. Do the Wim Hof method if you want. That's a bit more kind of maybe suitable for people from the West. It might be easier to connect to that because he talks a lot of science. Wim Hof, cool guy. But also and just talking about getting in touch with your biology. But you could use that. But yeah, basically, read The Power of Now. I highly encourage you to read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Learn to realize you are not your mind, you're not your thoughts. You can watch the thoughts. You are the watcher of thoughts, of emotions, of colors, of everything. You are just this witnessing space, and you can't really notice yourself because you are not an object. You are the subject. You are the space which objects come into. And so you can just notice yourself as the space. That's what I'm working on. It's kind of confusing, but maybe because I'm trying to understand it through manipulating linguistic objects of words. But in moments of lucidity, I understand it as I have been that, and I've been the universe, and I've felt my oneness, and basically as the watcher there, you are basically connecting to, you are just the universe. You're just the empty space of the universe. I think that's what's going on. And anyway, so basically, that so much to say that one, I believe through experiential, what do you call that? Epistemological evidence? No, what is that word I'm looking for? But like experimental evidence. Yes, I think, whatever. Epistemological evidence or whatever. Experimental first-hand evidence, feedback, you can notice that you are conscious. Consciousness is present here, right now. And it's not a thought, it's just consciousness. Here I am. And you could then go, oh, maybe it's an illusion, because how do you get consciousness out of matter? The hard problem of consciousness doesn't make sense. How can you get it, how can all these, complex things generate consciousness? Maybe consciousness is just there's no blue or green inside my brain. So, is it just an illusion? No, I think it's the other way around. I think consciousness is real, and, the brain, it's like, as Eckhart Tolle says, the brain didn't make consciousness, but consciousness made the brain, among many other things. And consciousness is the primordial essence of reality. It's just a word, consciousness. You could also call it awareness, presence, being, love, Jeff, whatever you want to call it. It's just a word. Some of them can be useful in different contexts. God, life, source, reality, emptiness, infinity. So, but it is what it is, beyond words. It is that which is beyond words and thus beyond thought. It's just the silent presence of everything. And we are that. And so, so that consciousness is present, and you could think, oh, it's an illusion, but then, I would say that doesn't make sense if just from your own experience. But also, if you want, get you some of the way, I could say if you think about it, if you were to say, we can all agree, I think, that it feels like it's not an illusion. It feels like it's real, right? So that's already leaning towards, it's not conclusive evidence, but it leans us towards, it's probably real. Everyone thinks that we're really here, but it's only if we go, oh yeah, wait, that causes a problem over there with some logical argument, some beliefs I'm invested in. Or maybe this is an illusion. That's the only reason we say it. Intuitively, it feels like, oh no, it feels real. This presence, I am here. But but let's condescend to think about it, even though all you need to do is just turn off your mind for a second, and you will know it's real consciousness and that you're it. But let's just go into it. Why not? Icing on the cake. So that if it's an illusion, okay, conscious is just an illusion. How are you conscious that it's an illusion? Does that not require that you've gone, okay, A plus B plus C equals D. Okay, therefore this is an illusion. How did you even make those steps of an argument if there's no consciousness processing the truth here and understanding what's happening? If you're asleep, if what is it, like a robot just processing things? Like, is that really credible? You could say, oh yeah, maybe it's like a computer just processing it, doesn't know what it's doing. But does it not seem to you that you are going, no, I am conscious that this doesn't make sense? It feels to you again like, your experience of it is that, I am conscious of an illusion here. But then you're saying that consciousness is the illusion. So that's a contradiction. So anyway, I think, we are conscious, and also there's only one thing in reality. This is premise number 2. Premise number 1, consciousness exists. 2, and that's the most fundamental thing we can know, is that we are conscious. Because anything else we believe, it just means because we are conscious of, we're using our consciousness to navigate truths and, understand things or see things, experience things. If our consciousness isn't real, then all this other stuff could just be illusions. Consciousness is the most real thing we have. It's the most fundamental thing we know, which is another reason why to take it more seriously than, your belief that maybe it's an illusion. Because which came first? The consciousness was here first, pal. And that's only through consciousness have you been able to, get to that point. But anyway, so consciousness is present. Consciousness exists. Then premise 2 is that all is one. So the whole universe. If you think about it, we keep zooming in on everything: the microphone, the Buddha statue here, the candle, the floor. Your eyelashes, your sneakers. Let's say Elon Musk's favorite scarf, whatever. Zoom in on everything. It's all made of the same stuff. It's all protons, electrons, and neutrons, with 99.99% empty space in between everything. And you zoom in on the particles, and they're made of subatomic particles, which are again 99.9% empty space. The quarks and stuff, quarks or whatever it is, they're all, you keep the same thing. Keep turtles all the way down. You keep zooming in, and in the end, it seems like it's just a soup of energy. Some people say it's strings, but then, okay, zoom in on the strings. What do you see? And and even if there was some sort of thing like, okay, there's strings and they're in space, or it's like, well, there's some particle and it's, there's polka dots and the space. Anything where you're saying there's things, more than one thing, and there's space in between them. Okay, well then, isn't the space part of reality also? If the space isn't part of reality, how is it qualified to separate objects in physical reality? Clearly it's part of the universe. It's part of reality and our experience. On the macro level, my hand is between the camera and the microphone, and also on the micro level, where it's like this space between the polka dots that make up existence or whatever. And so no matter what you get to, if you think, oh, there's objects and there's space in between them, the space is made of universe, the objects are made of universe. The only thing that separates them is your word, where you're saying things and space. But it's all made of universe, right? So let's just cut to the chase and go, yeah, okay, it's useful to think of things and space, on one level, but basically it also makes sense to say, yeah, they're the same thing. It's all universe. And so which of those is more fundamental? Which do you think was here first? Which do you think will be here longest? Which is therefore the more ultimate perspective? Okay, it's all one. And you come to this intuitively when you turn off your mind anyway. Just directly you'll sense your oneness with everything. And so all is one. So premise 1, consciousness exists. Premise 2, there's only one thing. Do you see where I'm going with this? Therefore, the whole universe is conscious, and we can say consciousness, consciously, if you want, whatever. The universe is consciousness. Consciousness is the universe. The whole universe is alive. QED. That would be my point of view. So anything else? Oh, maybe that's a pretty good spot to leave it on. Anything else outrageous and interesting I'd want to mention? That, let's see. That seems pretty good. All right. Thanks everyone for your attention, if anyone's still here. I hope this has helped you maybe open your mind a little bit, and or just been interesting in some way. I'm always trying to get a clearer perspective, and I think we could all yeah, have a bit of a more open mind. And so if you have anything from this where you think, oh yeah, I think here you're overlooking this, or you got that wrong, or this, please let me know. I really want to know. But I would love to have you open my mind on whatever it is. And yeah, this is all just, like I say, things here. I don't, there's things I know, there's things I don't know, there's things I think might be true, or must be true, or are probably true, should be true. But yeah, so anyway, I think at the end of the day, it's like these kind of conversations are really useful and good for us, and good for yourself, but good for everyone, just so we can kind of figure out, imagine if the whole world was being this honest and just talking about stuff, I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of interesting things to say, but who don't say it because they're worried what people think. But, isn't that kind of like a tragic thing? Like, I think there's so much interesting stuff we can share by going, yeah, I agree with you, or no, I don't agree with you, and why, And so, yeah, let me know if there's any questions you have or comments, and like this video, or send it to someone if you think they'd appreciate it. Sending it to people would be really cool. Spread the good vibes, and I love you, fellow branch on the tree of life. See you next week.